Beijing passed its national security law for Hong Kong, setting the stage for radical changes. According to the complete draft, the new law doesn't just affect Hong Kong residents. Hundreds of middle-class Beijing residents try to stop police from tearing down their homes. One expert says the move is an unusual one, as forced demolitions usually target those at the bottom of society. The U.S. making a series of moves in the Indo-Pacific, suggesting America might be taking real action to counter China's coercive behaviors in the region and defend its allies. In a strong move targeting China in the online space, India bans nearly 60 Chinese mobile apps. This is just the beginning of the anti-China sentiment in India. And a newfound strain of swine flu proving infectious to humans. A study says the strain has a potential pandemic threat, but experts warn not to overreact. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Flooding continues in China. It's now the area's fifth round of heavy rain. In one case, downed electricity poles electrically charged floodwaters in Hubei province, causing the death of one young woman. Her body was later carried away. The flooding in some areas has become so severe that the first and even second floors of some buildings have been submerged, but it may soon become even worse. In one neighborhood inside the northwestern Chinese city of Chongqing, a notice was posted that all residents living at or below the fourth floor should prepare for flooding. This neighborhood is nearby the famous Yangtze River. We recently reported about a county in Hebei province that was put under lockdown due to the area's worsening virus situation. Hebei province is Beijing's neighbor. Internal documents we obtained show large-scale virus testing has already started in the province. So far, no Chinese media have reported on it. Last week, the province's virus task force ordered all cities to increase virus testing. In addition to people who've had close contact with confirmed cases, other groups are also being tested now. They include travelers arriving from areas with mid to high-risk infection levels, students in the 9th and 12th grade, and workers inside hospitals, nursing houses, welfare homes, customs, construction sites, prisons, and government agencies. Despite the strict measures taken, the official virus figures from the province are surprisingly low. The latest report from last Sunday shows no new cases, no new deaths, and no new suspected cases. That same day, only 10 confirmed cases were treated in a local hospital. Beijing's second round of lockdown is taking its toll on the city's second-hand housing market. According to a Chinese research institute, in the first 3 weeks of June, the number of second-hand houses sold in Chinese capital fell over 30% from the previous year. Many neighborhoods have implemented strict rules for property managers. As a result, hosting open houses for prospective new residents and buyers has become near impossible. Some agents are now suspending their listings online after the widespread business slowdown. One real estate agent told a reporter that nobody comes to see houses on site during weekdays. It's already good if we can have one client during the weekend. A new flu virus found in Chinese pigs has become more infectious to humans. The new strain is called G4. It descended from the H1N1 strain, which was responsible for the 2011 swine flu pandemic. The newfound strain has all the essential features of a pandemic virus. A study suggests that it should be watched closely in case it becomes a potential pandemic threat. According to a U.S. medical journal, pig farm workers showed elevated levels of the virus in their blood. The journal suggests that they be urgently and closely monitored. Viruses that cross the species barrier from animals to humans are especially risky, even more so in densely populated regions in China where millions live in close proximity to farms, breeding facilities, slaughterhouses, and wet markets. Now we look at heavy snow in northwestern China's Xinjiang region, where the Uyghur ethnic group lives. Millions of Uyghurs have been put in detention camps by the Chinese Communist Party. Earlier this week, heavy snow suddenly blanketed Xinjiang. It's a rare occurrence for this time of year. In a video, people are heard shouting, "The cattle and sheep cannot eat the grass. They are coming back and it's too cold." People are also seen struggling to trudge through the deep snow. Temperatures in the area plummeted by nearly 40 degrees as thick snowfall coated the area. But for some, it's a happy occasion. Young people are captured taking advantage of the unusual weather conditions for a snowball fight. Now we turn to another concern plaguing the Xinjiang region. The Chinese Communist regime is reportedly using forced sterilization, forced abortion, and coercive family planning against minority Muslims, known as Uyghurs, to prevent reproduction. According to a report from the Washington-based think tank Jamestown Foundation, the actions meet a criteria cited in the UN Convention on Genocide. State Secretary Pompeo said the practices were consistent with decades of Chinese Communist Party actions that demonstrate an utter disregard for the sanctity of human life and basic human dignity. Over 50 tourists survived a sudden mega flood in Sichuan. The experience caused a huge loss of property and risked the tourists' lives.
Floods in the southwestern Chinese province of Sichuan trapped over 50 tourists in a hotel. They are lucky to have escaped, yet they lost most of their belongings. Ms. Wang is a witness of the disaster and told us her story. She said the rainstorm began to pour a few hours after they checked in. They were not taking it that seriously at first, but late at night their rooms started flooding. Things were getting much worse after just a couple of hours.
We found the entire room floor began to warp. Then we realized there was a flash flood.
Ms. Wang says the water level rose incredibly fast and soon got as high as 5 feet. The hotel is a collection of individual rooms. The rooms are in the shape of a cargo container. 20 to 30 rooms of the hotel were displaced, and theirs the most.
Floods blocked the entire front door, and there was no way we could open it. We could get out from the back window, but we didn't dare to. The torrential floods were outside everywhere.
They had to wait for rescue, but that was not easy. Ms. Wang says the hotel staff evacuated the moment they felt the water, with only 3 or 4 people left in the hotel.
Most of the employees left, and they did not notify us to evacuate at all.
As the situation got worse, the tourists tried to save themselves. Some were standing on vehicles, some on fences. A couple were up to their necks in water, and they finally climbed onto the roof from the back window. Ms. Wang said they heard someone shouting for help from outside. They opened their window and found an old man. They dragged him in the room. The glass wall of his room was broken by floods, and he was almost washed away. He somehow managed to hold onto air conditioning rails and stand in the torrent for an hour before being rescued. They had to wait for almost 3 hours after their first emergency call and did not get out of there until almost 6 the next morning.
The experience reminds me of the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, where your life was on the verge of death.
The Sichuan earthquake was a magnitude 8.0 quake that claimed over 69,000 lives, according to Chinese officials. But many people believe this number is highly underestimated. The tourists now wish to negotiate with the hotel over compensation for the lost property and damaged vehicles, but so far they have received no response.
The Chinese regime passed its national security legislation for Hong Kong. The new law sets the stage for radical changes to the region's way of life. This after returning to Chinese rule almost exactly 23 years ago.
China passed a security law that gives Beijing sweeping powers over Hong Kong Tuesday morning. The territory's cable TV, citing an unidentified source, said the law was passed unanimously by China's parliament. It sets the stage for the most radical changes to the former British colony since it was handed back to China in 1997. A draft of the law had not yet been published, but Beijing says it aims to tackle subversion, terrorism, separatism and collusion with foreign forces. There are reports that the heaviest penalty under the law would be life imprisonment. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam spoke shortly after news broke, but refused to comment. Beijing says the law will target only a small group of troublemakers and will not affect rights and freedoms, nor investor interests. But on Monday, Washington said it would end Hong Kong's special status under US law. That will stop defense exports to the city and restrict its access to high-tech products. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the US was left with no other choice and, quote, the Chinese Communist Party's decision to eviscerate Hong Kong's freedoms has forced the Trump administration to re-evaluate its policies toward the territory. It's unclear what specific activities are to be made illegal or what punishment they carry. However, Chinese state media already unveiled parts of the law. Judges for security cases are expected to be appointed by Carrie Lam.
The national security law is expected to take effect immediately. Violations may result in extradition to China for trial and a maximum sentence of life in prison. Both violent and non-violent activities are included as crimes. Hours after Beijing passed the national security law on Hong Kong, activist Joshua Wong disbanded his pro-democracy group. Wong made the announcement on Twitter. He also called for the international community to speak up for Hong Kong and defend the region's freedom. Shortly afterwards, other members of the group also said they were stepping down. Wong said beforehand he thinks he'll be a prime target for the new law.
I will probably be the prime target of the new law. But what makes me fear is not my potential imprisonment, but the gloomy fact that the new law will be the threat over the city's future, and not only my personal life.
Wong was at the forefront of the city's pro-democracy umbrella movement protests in 2014. He's rallied overseas support for the pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong, particularly in the U.S. But he's come under fire in Beijing. Many Chinese state-run media have printed his name and slammed him for his activities. Despite fears over the law's passing, protests are still planned in Hong Kong.
With Beijing's draconian national security law to take imminent effect, Hong Kongers' voices are still calling out their objection. Gathered in a Hong Kong shopping mall and having heard the news, their pro-democracy protest continues. What they don't know yet is whether this kind of activity will be deemed illegal under the new law. This Hong Kong resident says the law is very vague. He says most people don't know what the law specifically prohibits or what the punishments will be.
Most of the Hong Kong people, indeed all of them, have no idea what even the law is, and no idea what the provisions are, and what are the punishments, and what are the so-called the punishable acts.
But they do know that the law wasn't passed according to the One Country, Two Systems agreement put in place when the region was handed over to China from British control 23 years ago. The framework was set to protect freedoms unavailable in mainland China for at least 50 years.
Based on the One Country, Two System, Hong Kong's own law should be passed in the Legislative Council in the Hong Kong way, but not in the Chinese way.
This student says Hong Kongers have had no say in the law, and it was passed through improper channels, overriding Hong Kong's own legislative body. Local activists in Hong Kong are still urging people to take to the streets on Wednesday, July 1st, to protest. Police have banned the gathering. The organizers of the event include pro-democracy group leaders, the chairman of Hong Kong's Democratic Party, district councillors, and lawmakers.
Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam welcomed the new law in a statement saying it would come into effect later that day. The complete draft of the law was published at 11 p.m. local time, and here are some of the highlights. First, it's noteworthy that the law is extraterritorial. According to Article 38 of the draft, the law doesn't only punish Hong Kong residents deemed as security threats by Beijing, but it also applies to non-Hong Kong residents who violated this law outside of Hong Kong. Essentially, even non-Hong Kong people criticizing Beijing government could also be punished once they set foot on Hong Kong. And Article 36 notes that so long as the individual or entity's activities have the effect on Hong Kong, they will be viewed as committing a crime in Hong Kong. The law also confirms concerns that Beijing will send its people to Hong Kong to enforce the law. Under Article 54, Beijing and the Hong Kong government will join force to manage foreign organizations and news agencies in the city. Meanwhile, according to Article 60, security agents sent from Beijing are not under Hong Kong's jurisdiction. Therefore, they don't have to obey the laws in Hong Kong. And finally, according to Article 65, the ultimate power to interpret the law rests with Beijing's National People's Congress. But international criticism is mounting. Taiwan's president told reporters she was very disappointed by China's imposition of the law. She said it proved the one country, two systems formula, which Beijing has suggested could be a basis for unification with the mainland, was not viable. She also wrote on Twitter that Taiwan will continue to support Hong Kongers who want freedom and democracy. Other countries voicing concern include Japan, the British government, the European Union, and South Korea. The UK expresses its deep concern over Beijing passing the so-called national security law. It fears that Hong Kongers could soon lose their freedoms. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has more.
There are fears that Hong Kong's unique freedoms are at risk as Beijing increasingly draws the city into its orbit. The UK Prime Minister saying he will scrutinise the text of a new law once it's out and translated. Beijing passed the law before publishing full details of the legislation. He expressed his concerns this morning.
We are obviously deeply concerned about the decision to pass the national security law in Beijing as it affects Hong Kong.
In the House of Commons, Raab said he will bring it up with the UN.
The success of Hong Kong, the entrepreneurial spirit, the vibrancy, the economic success, has been built on its autonomy in the one country, two systems paradigm. That clearly is at threat.
There are fears that human rights violations happening in China could extend to Hong Kong.
The concerns are real in Westminster here, not just from myself as chair of the APPG and Freedom of Religious Belief, but indeed from many others who have concerns for those citizens in Hong Kong who will then be subject to a law in China that quite clearly is there to support the state and to suppress religious freedom, to suppress human rights and to suppress equality issues.
There's a push for a global response, with evidence showing the Chinese regime's human rights abuses of Falun Gong practitioners, Christians and Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
Some people say that Hong Kong will become the new Xinjiang. And that might seem like a huge overstatement. You might look at Hong Kong now and say, well, it's nothing like that region. How could it become that way? But I suggest that those who are saying it could never happen do not understand the Chinese Communist Party and the way that they see independence or successionist efforts.
The UK Foreign Secretary has promised the UK would follow through with its offer to extend visa rights to about 2.9 million Hong Kongers. An urgent question on Hong Kong is expected in Parliament tomorrow. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Lawmakers and campaigners are calling for the UK, EU, US, and Canada, among others, to come together to offer more visa options to Hong Kongers who might need refuge. Now we turn to the U.S. response. The United States will now take steps to end exports of both civil and military technology to Hong Kong, the same as it does for mainland China. The decision was made even before Beijing's final vote to enact the national security law in the city. The new law has alarmed foreign governments and democracy activists who say it undermines the region's freedom and autonomy. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. ban is an effort to protect national security, and if Beijing uses a one-country, one-system approach with Hong Kong, the U.S. must do the same. He added that the U.S. cannot risk these items falling into the hands of the People's Liberation Army, whose primary purpose is to uphold the dictatorship of the CCP by any means necessary. About a decade ago, the U.S. expanded restrictions to prohibit exporting military items to mainland China. And the U.S. is cutting off some trade benefits to Hong Kong. This comes after Beijing imposed a national security law that would limit Hong Kong's autonomy and raise national security concerns for the U.S.
The Trump administration is making it harder to export sensitive American technology to Hong Kong. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said that with the Chinese Communist Party's imposition of new security measures on Hong Kong, the risk that sensitive U.S. technology will be diverted to the People's Liberation Army or Ministry of State Security has increased, all while undermining the territory's autonomy. The Commerce Department will suspend special treatment to Hong Kong for things like export license exceptions. Sensitive technology exports to Hong Kong and mainland China used to be treated differently. Before, only China needed special licenses. Now, exports to Hong Kong will also need special licenses. The U.S. will also stop selling defense equipment to Hong Kong. It's a symbolic act that will most likely affect sales to Hong Kong's police forces. But Hong Kong remains an important trading partner for the U.S. In 2018, America's largest trade surplus was with Hong Kong at $31 billion. At that time, over 700 U.S. companies had regional offices there.
Residents from an upscale Beijing neighborhood are now struggling after local officials destroyed their homes. One expert says the move is an unusual one, as forced demolitions usually target those at the bottom of society. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
An unusual sight in one Beijing district. Hundreds of residents gathered in front of their homes at 5 o'clock in the morning. They assembled to wait for the police to arrive, who were on their way to tear down their houses.
Based on past experiences, the police will usually make their move before dawn.
Lee was among the residents trying to guard their homes. To protect his safety, we gave him a pseudonym and distorted his voice. Residents formed a human wall and threw stones, shouting, "Guard our homes," in an effort to block police from entering the neighborhood.
The police sprayed pepper spray on people at the front, same as they did with Hong Kong protesters, directly into the face.
Lee said that one woman, who had not acted violently or provoked the police, was sprayed directly in the eyes. She was handled violently by police afterward.
They were dragging my hair, dragging me to the ground. I laid down on the ground and people stepped on me and walked past me.
Several residents were removed by force. But despite their best efforts, they weren't able to save their homes. Lee explained that the police later marched in and began demolishing houses behind his neighborhood. In China, it's common for the government to demolish people's homes and seize the land to make room for new, more profitable projects. In the past, it's usually the lower class that suffers the most. What's unusual this time is that Lee's neighborhood is an affluent one. Located in Beijing's suburban Changping district, residents are part of Beijing's middle class. But the government has been tearing down houses in the area since last year, though targeting these people can prove difficult for the regime.
Those in the middle class have significant social influence and resources.
China affairs expert Tang Jingyuan says seizing homes from these groups will intensify tensions in the society and create social conflict. Despite the challenges, officials still moved ahead with the demolition. One expert says it indicates the regime is in a dire situation.
This incident in turn reflects that the regional government is in a financial crisis. It had no other way of bringing in money.
Tang explained that China's economy is on a sharp decline after being hit with the U.S. trade war and the pandemic. As a result, many regional governments are financially struggling. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
With aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific, a new Senate defense bill aimed at China and the possible inclusion of Taiwan in this year's Pacific military exercise. These moves suggest the U.S. is now taking real action to counter China's coercive behaviors in the Indo-Pacific and to defend its allies.
The last time 3 U.S. aircraft carriers operated at the same time in the Western Pacific, the U.S. was trying to deter North Korea from its nuclear weapons program. The rare incident is now happening again, but this time, USS Nimitz, Theodore Roosevelt, and Ronald Reagan were there because of China.
While the Chinese Communist Party ramps up its disinformation campaign to try to shift blame and burnish its image, we continue to see aggressive behavior by the PLA in the South China Sea.
The PLA has escalated border tensions. We see them today in India, the world's most populous democracy. We watch as it militarizes the South China Sea and illegally claims more territory there, threatening vital sea lanes.
Since 2015, the Chinese regime has built man-made islands, militarizing them with airports, aircraft, and missiles. The area is of great global importance. Nearly a third of the world's maritime trade passes through this area of water. It is the lifeline for important U.S. allies like Korea and Japan, who import over 90% of their crude oil through this route. Meanwhile, beneath the ocean is buried over 10 billion barrels of oil and almost 200 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, although one Chinese regime-owned oil major put the figures much higher. International law says that every country can claim an exclusive economic zone extending up to 200 nautical miles for activities like drilling or fishing. But China claims Beijing reaches as far as 1,200 miles from the south of mainland China, including areas very close to the coast of Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. In 2016, the Hague International Tribunal concluded that there was no legal basis for China's claim to the territory. And for years, the U.S. has navigated its warships through the area to show that it is not recognizing China's claim. But none of this has stopped China from continuing to build man-made islands and militarizing them.
But Beijing says it won't abide by the court's decision and refuses to scale back its economic and military presence in the area.
Meanwhile, experts say Washington's failure to confront Beijing has left some U.S. allies in the region in difficult positions and unsure whether or not to continue challenging an increasingly aggressive China. But this year's pandemic is changing that. The Pacific pivot, as promised by 3 U.S. administrations to its Asian allies, might finally become reality. Earlier this month, the Senate's Armed Service Committee approved a $6 billion military fund to establish the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. It requires the Defense Department to build more smaller but more flexible bases in the region to counter China's potential missile strike and increase information sharing among allies in the region. The committee's summary said that the fund will focus resources on key military capabilities to deter China, while it will also reassure U.S. allies and partners and send a strong signal to the Chinese Communist Party that the American people are committed to defending U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific. Meanwhile, the Senate committee pressed a hot button by proposing an invitation to Taiwan in this year's Pacific Maritime Exercises in August, the biggest joint drill in the world. The once every 2 years exercise has in the past invited nearly all Indo-Pacific countries except for North Korea and Taiwan. Even Russia participated once in 2012. China was also invited to participate in the exercise in 2014 and again in 2016. But in 2018, the Trump administration excluded China for its coercive behavior in the South China Sea. This year's potential invitation to Taiwan may signify a bipartisan willingness to reconsider U.S. military relationships with China and Taiwan.
There is a change of situation. Part of the reason is the regional tension caused by the CCP virus. The U.S. Navy's recent mobilization, the behaviors recently by its allies and the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command have shown that the most important thing is the Indo-Pacific region. From Northeast Asia along the East China Sea, the periphery of the Taiwan Strait, to the Bashi Channel and the South China Sea, they are now strengthening alliances and increasing military power. The role of Taiwan has become increasingly important. Therefore, we still look forward to the Pacific Rim military exercise this year, and if Taiwan can be officially invited, that is another breakthrough.
During the 1950s to the 1970s, the U.S. and Taiwan were allies under the Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty, agreeing that if one country came under attack, the other would aid and provide military support. In 1979, the Carter administration established diplomatic relations with Beijing and unilaterally annulled the treaty with Taiwan. Some of the treaty's content was carried over to the Taiwan Relations Act, which doesn't promise direct military assistance in case of an invasion by Beijing. Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
India has launched a series of bans on Chinese products, services, and even officials. The move comes after a deadly border clash between the countries earlier this month.
India is banning nearly 60 Chinese mobile apps, including TikTok and China's Twitter equivalent WeChat. Indian officials claim they threaten national security. TikTok owner ByteDance had plans to invest $1 billion in India. The company also recently ramped up hiring there. India stands as TikTok's biggest market, boasting a whopping 600 million downloads. That's 30% of the app's downloads worldwide. Some TikTok users in India were upset over the ban. India is also weighing a ban on Chinese tech giant Huawei, which would exclude the telecoms company from India's 5G network rollout. Anti-China sentiment has long simmered in India, and a border clash earlier this month has brought tensions to the forefront. Some are now calling for a boycott of Chinese imports. In Delhi, 3,000 hotels and restaurants have already closed their doors to Chinese nationals. China's car investments in India are also on pause. Meanwhile, India plans to impose higher tariffs on Chinese imports. Since last week, Indian customs have held back shipments coming from China. China is India's biggest importer. Purchases include electronic goods, industrial machinery, and organic chemicals. The chairman of India's largest car maker says the answer lies in making Indian manufacturing more competitive to reduce Chinese imports.
Some states are seeing a rise in virus cases. California is one of the latest states to pause reopening efforts ahead of the 4th of July weekend.
California is rolling back some of its reopening efforts as confirmed virus cases rise. County officials are closing Los Angeles beaches over the 4th of July weekend to prevent dangerous crowding. Fireworks displays in the county will also be prohibited. California Governor Gavin Newsom ordered some bars to close earlier this week. The Cat and Fiddle Pub and Restaurant in Los Angeles just reopened its dining area. The manager is relieved that they don't have to close.
We're in the fortunate situation that we also serve food, so we are a restaurant. So it's it's a good thing for us. I'm glad, especially since today is the first day that we're allowing dining customers that we're able to stay open.
She hopes things can turn around quickly.
The business is not what it used to be, and it's a different experience, but I think people are, getting used to the idea that this is going to be a normal for a little while.
Public health officials identify bars as the riskiest non-essential businesses currently open. Last week, Texas and Florida shut all their bars. Arizona's governor also rolled back the state's reopening this week. He's ordered the closure of bars, nightclubs, gyms, movie theaters, and water parks.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.